Hi there, you're listening to the ACE podcast. I'm Pete Paphides, and today it's my great pleasure to introduce to you a good friend of mine and a good friend of Ace Records, who has been living a pop fan's dream for all of his adult life ever since 1986, when he and his best mate Pete Wiggs created their own fanzine Pop Avalanche, which he described as a cross between the Topper and an Angry Brigade missive. He grew up in Reigate in Surrey, just a short bus ride from the Red Hill branch of Woolworths, where he bought his first ever record, Amateur Hour by Sparks, and then since then he's bought a few more. In a forthcoming book of biographical reminiscences, he reveals that the section of his home which houses his records is an attempt to recreate the look and feel of Beano's legendary record shop in Croydon. Throughout the whole of his adult life, he's been making music and writing about it too. Last year, his group Etienne released their 9th studio album, Home Counties, to universal acclaim, and in 2013, his definitive history of pop, Yeah Yeah Yeah, the story of modern pop, instantly established itself as a set text for inquisitive music lovers of all ages. He'll also be kicking off Pomona Books' new Sleeve Note series in January, a volume in which he's written about episodes in his life that had an influence on his music with Etienne. And as well as making albums, he also compiles them. For Ace, the chaps from Etienne have put together 3 brilliantly thematically linked collections of music: English Weather, Paris in the Spring, and a brand new anthology, State of the Union, The American Dream in Crisis. And lest we forget, there was also When the Day is Done, which gathered together the orchestrations of Robert Kirby, best known for his work with Nick Drake. The man sitting right in front of me is, of course, Bob Stanley.
Hello, Pete.
Hey. I want to start, I think, by talking about making compilations, which is something you do a lot of, and you're very good at it. Obviously, not just the ones you've done for Ace, though, but sort of compilations in general. The ones you've been doing, does it feel like a continuation from what you did? You know, what I guess we both did with cassettes as children.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the State of the Union is something I kind of been mulling over for years and made various sort of first drafts of it. So it's really exciting to actually see it as a proper record with proper artwork, hopefully there'll be more of these things to come.
Well, yeah, I mean, it exists in your head for so long. It must be and it's got such a beautiful sleeve as well. Cheers! Kind of blue-skied kind of photograph of kind of children play. Would it have been of that period between 1967 and 1973?
Yeah, I think it's 72. It's part of the Nixon government had this initiative called Documerica, where they wanted professional photographers to go around the country taking photos of the pollution and not just pollution. I mean, just the state of the country and things that look like they could be better. And the archive is just absolutely astonishing, and it's it's one of those things that makes you think, oh, okay, things look a lot cleaner now than they did in the early 70s. There's just incredible pollution, sort of pictures of strip mining in wherever, the Midwest. But this is like this shot is just a fairly sort of standard kind of timber frame house with kids playing in the garden, and right next to it there's this chimney belching out smoke. So there's this massive black cloud. It's hard to see at first, but the blue sky just goes black the higher up it goes, and that's just pure
the pollution. Oh, yeah. Right, okay.
It's really, really bad.
Because it also looks very beautiful as well.
Yeah, it kind of looks like it's like a still from the Brady Bunch or something, but it's not. It's not really. It's an amazing archive anyway. Documerica.
So you'd been gathering tracks. Is this how it works with you in compilations? You kind of gather tracks kind of in your mind, I guess, to start with, one at a time, and when you have sort of enough for it to sort of feel like, I guess those songs are sort of essentially telling a story, aren't they?
Yeah.
Then it's time to get to work.
I mean, it's kind of starting with maybe a dozen tracks that are clearly linked, and then sort of fleshing that out and getting a first draft. I mean, quite often you don't get everything you want, but Liz Buckley at Ace is incredibly skilled at clearing things like incredibly, the Beach Boys, Frank Sinatra, the Four Seasons, people who never normally clear for compilations. So
yeah, it's really an incredible sort of procession of artists. So like we say, if any kind of, if a compilation tells a story, what story, in your word, does this compilation seek to tell?
It's kind of sort of post psychedelic America, I suppose, when I think 1968 was like a really key year, obviously around the world, but in America, I think it was the year that most people probably turned against the Vietnam War, and there were assassinations of like really important, Bobby Kennedy, Martin Luther King, a few weeks apart, which just seems it's hard to really understand how much of impact on the American psyche that would have had. And so it's kind of the music that's like a reflection on that, by people who previously you'd have thought were possibly conservative, or certainly would have just been singing, like Bing Crosby.
Yeah,
had never sung a political song in his life, but he did in 1967. It was obviously quite gentle. You're not expecting these people to.
No,
sort of like wave placards, but it's kind of like old America, just like in a state of confusion and
there's sort of thoughtful songs about what it means to be American, often told in the form of vignettes, but nevertheless they correspond to a mood that is there, and so that's kind of that seems to be the common thread. Yeah,
it's and then there's. Divorce rates were going through the roof by the late 60s, and the cover reflects what the American way of life was actually doing to the countryside, which was like destroying it, because it was so consumer led, massive cars and what have you. It's various themes. There's a couple of songs about divorce and families breaking down, and the Bing Crosby one's about the space race, and wondering what on earth we're doing while the world's in a mess. It's
a lot of questions, or at least questions about things that also sort of younger artists were asking questions. But I guess because these artists were a bit older, and maybe they had children, they had that sort of slightly more reflective, sort of careworn perspective on the world, and that seems to be what comes through. I mean, there's a track from Frank Sinatra's album Watertown, which in itself is an incredible record, isn't it?
Yeah, that's an amazing record.
How did you? Watertown is an album that's kind of it's spawned kind of bodies of words. An amazing website sort of devoted entirely to that record. What is it about that record that makes people love it as much as they do?
I think it's beautifully produced. It's a very sort of simple story as well, and I think the last person you're expecting to do that is Frank Sinatra, given what happened in his life. But it's like a bloke who lives in a small town. His wife's left him. You assume she's left him. She hasn't just died, which is like some people's readings of it.
Right. Yeah.
Because he's just happy living in a small town, and presumably she has more ambition. And it's that very simple story told over a whole album. So there's a song about the kids. Odd mentions of the bloke, their gardener who's mowing the lawn. I mean, just really odd. Not odd, but it's very, very minor details. It's just very beautifully observed, and
it really is.
His voice is perfect for it, because it's he retired straight after it came out because no one bought it, and also he thought his voice was going, and he didn't want to carry on till he dropped. So he took 3 years off and then came back and ruined that perfect ending. But never mind.
You must have been delighted. I know that there's a Roy Orbison song on there, Southbound Jericho Parkway, which is sort of an epic piece of work, and I know it's a song that's been sort of kind of close to your heart for a long time. That must have been thrill getting that cleared for the record. For people who don't know, what tell us a bit about that song.
It's 7 minutes long, so it would have come out in the wake of MacArthur Park and Hey Jude and other epic songs in '68. It came out in 1969, but it's got no chorus. It's just like, I think, maybe 5 different pieces stuck together that tell tell a story of a businessman who's divorced at the beginning, who drives his car into a wall and kills himself, and then it goes through each member of his family reflecting on this death. It's not the most commercial single ever released, but it's just an astonishing record. It was arranged by these two guys who recorded as the Neon Philharmonic, who aren't on this, but
Tupper
Saucy and Don Gant, yeah. So that's the reason it sounds the way it does. They didn't write it, oddly, but I think they must have had a hand in writing it, even though I don't get a credit.
Yeah. That's incredible. So yeah, I mean, I get sort of. So that's sort of how, from conception to execution, a record like that. How long does it sort of take to see it through?
It's been over a year from like the first draft. You end up waiting on a lot of things to clear, leaving it as long as you possibly can. I think the 4 seasons only came through at the last minute. But so you have like sort of substitute tracks in mind as well. But there's always like a dream running order, and this is very, very close to it.
Yeah, I must say. I mean,
nothing
absolutely. Can you remember the first literally the first compilation you ever made in your life, or good, close as?
I think the first one I did that wasn't literally just taping things off the radio was would have been 1980. Oh, and also just like compilations of singles you've bought, which doesn't really count. I did like a sort of summer 60s summer compilation, which had things like By the Time I Get to Phoenix and Elusive Butterfly. So nothing obscure. Different Drum by the Stone Ponies. That's pretty much the most obscure thing on it. But just like from various compilations and albums I had.
How old were you?
I'd have been 15, I think. So not that.
Can you remember that? So those are kind of songs that I would imagine your parents being quite approving that you would have put on a compilation. Can you remember remember any response from them?
No. I always wanted them to like things I was playing. I was like the opposite of most teenagers. I remember I bought Julian Cope's Scott Walker compilation, and my mum thought it was terrible, and but she loved the Walker Brothers. It's like, how hard do I have to try here? So,
that tells a story in itself. That tells us a little bit of a story about Scott Walker as well. And how the kind of, I guess, the goodwill he slightly lost amongst some of his fans.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Your dad was. I read a story once about him. I think this might have been in the book, maybe, about Tennessee Ernie Ford's 16 Tons. That was like a kind of like a lodestone record for him, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think he'd have been like 13 or 14 when it came out, and it was he loved it. And then he was at school, and some other kid at school said, "What's your favourite record, Dave?" And he said 16 Tons. I'm like, "Pfft, old hat." And it was like about 4 weeks after it had been number one, because Bill Haley was now the thing to be into. And my dad was like, "Well, I like that as well. I can't really see why you're not allowed to like both." And I think it's kind of how I've gone through my life with this story in my head. I could never really understand why. I remember being maybe sort of 12 or 13, and people who were like older than me at school had favourite bands, and I was like, don't really understand the concept of favourite bands. I mean, obviously I like a lot of music, but I remember that very clearly. I just liked what was in the chart and pretty much everything I heard, I suppose. Yeah, well, which is kind of, I guess, fairly standard, really. But I guess it does it's kind of, I feel like that kind of period of pop music history was sort of a bit like the Big Bang, and our concept of time is contingent on what we know about the Big Bang, and sort of insofar as I understand it, I might misremember this, but I think time literally was going faster, sort of the closer you are to that colossal cosmic explosion, and now it's just kind of slowing down sort of slightly. So it does kind of make sense that you could go into school and say, "I love 16 Tons," and then someone says, "Are you joking? Like that was that's ancient," and people, it was only like 3 weeks ago. Yeah, because like certainly now, if you sort of went into school and said, I'm
what's your, like Wiley's my favourite artist, and someone says, "Are you joking, Wiley? We're all listening to Stormzy now." I'm not sure that's kind of, maybe it's happening. I don't know, but your dad was sort of very well. Your parents were very sort of welcoming of. Did they give you like records to play with?
Yeah, I mean they gave me their old records. My gran used to get me records from a junk shop, and because she ran a sweet shop, my grandparents ran a sweet shop in Brighton, and so she used to get the records from a junk shop, and then they'd like candy striped sweet bags. She cut holes out in the middle of them. And put the singles in, so it was like a proper 7-inch bag. I wish I had one of them, but I don't have any of them.
That must be like your Rosebud or something.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Didn't you? You used to sleep in the stock room of the shop. So when you used to stay with your grand, you used to sleep in the stock. So you used to literally sleep in a room that was floor to ceiling with chocolate.
Yeah, but all boxed up.
All of it boxed up.
Yeah, all of it boxed up, nothing loose, and there was like. Mouse traps, I remember around as well. Mouse poison.
Okay.
It was
that's
probably the early 70s. It was.
That's like. I
wasn't allowed to touch that either. Funnily enough.
No, but that's like that. That's almost weirdly the two extremes of the human experience for a child. Like the thing you'd least like sleeping in a room with mice. And yet packed floor to ceiling with all your favourite chocolate. Did you ever? So
no, I was too scared to eat any of the chocolate.
What would have happened? Do you think?
Probably nothing that bad really. I mean, I was probably threatened with never being able to stay with my grandparents again. But
yeah.
And I just believed that. So yeah, but I mean, no, it's pretty goody two shoes. I can't believe I never even ate one bar of chocolate there.
You didn't drink, you didn't smoke. Sorry, a bit of an adamant reference there for people of a certain age. This book. There's this book that you've read. It's just quite a small volume, but it's the first in a series of books by musicians where they talk about sort of things that inspired their music. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And yours is the first in the series, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's David Gedges doing one. I think maybe Stuart Murdoch.
Okay.
David Gedges is about 10 times the size of mine. Mine's
really
quite slim. Yeah.
Wow.
I don't know if he's gone through his whole career, but my one's just like a few snapshots at one song off each album, basically.
Well, yes, no, well, I'm just trying to imagine what David Gedges one would consist of. It's like sort of bumping into ex-girlfriends in supermarkets and then going off to write a song about it. must be comprise at least 1/3 of it. But but there's again, it's very nice when you read something by someone who you know very well, and yet there are sort of things that you didn't know. So, for instance, I didn't know until I read this that I'm just going to try and find the you worked as a teenager. At least I think as a teenager, you worked on an egg stall in Surrey Street Market in what was that, Croydon? Or?
Yeah, in Croydon. Yeah.
And it just sold eggs.
Eggs and cheese and bacon and ham.
What, those like eggs? I was going to say the Holy Trinity, but that's not. That's
I say ham. No, maybe it's just bacon, eggs, cheese, and bacon. That was it, I think.
Oh, good. We can say it's the Holy Trinity. Tell me about the egg stall. The eggs, because I mean. The details were quite unsavoury, I thought.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever written something where I've had to change someone's name for legal reasons. But the eggs we used to sell came over from Denmark, by which point they were past their sell-by date, and the woman who ran the egg stall used to sell them to unsuspecting people in Croydon. So my mum always used to say, remember to bring some eggs home. And I never did, and she was like, "Hey, gormless idiot," But I didn't want to say to her because I'd never be able to work there again that I'm selling poisonous eggs.
Yeah. So
which have if you open up the wrong box and it will have maggots crawling out of it.
And that literally would happen. You'd see maggoty eggs.
Oh yeah, no, it was really horrible.
Hang on, so the maggots were breaking out of the egg. Is that what?
Well, no. I mean, the egg must have been broken already. I guess.
And I don't really
want to think about
that. They'd migrated. Okay. This slightly breaks my heart because it's a little bit kind of, you're caught in between two. You're sort of, you don't want to snitch on the egg stall holder, and yet your mum, and of course, in order to not do that, obviously you don't want to bring poisonous eggs home. So that's a poignant quandary that you're in.
Yeah, it wasn't so much that I didn't want to snitch on her because she wasn't very nice, but more that I just wouldn't have a job, wouldn't have a Saturday job anymore, I guess. So it was entirely selfish. The store was like 2 or 3 doors down from Beano's, so I used to just like get my earnings at the end of it on a Saturday and then spend them all in Beano's. And
Beano's, for those people who don't know, in its pomp was a 4-floor record buyer's paradise, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think it sort of claimed to be the biggest second-hand shop in the country, record shop, and I can't imagine there was maybe Reddington's in Birmingham, but there can't have been many that were as big as that.
Well, I used to go to Reddington, so I can confirm that, because I've been to Beano's was bigger.
Okay, very good.
And what was it? The phrase that your mum used to sort of obviously when you came home without the eggs. I love this phrase. Can I say, or do you know what I mean?
I think so. Yeah.
Tit in a trance.
Yeah, yeah.
Is that a thing? I've never heard
I've never heard anyone. I was assuming it's a thing that lots of people said, but I've never heard anyone say it apart from my mum and my grandparents. So maybe it was just a family thing.
What, like you're
like 2 tits in a trance is kind of like the opposite of 2 peas in a pod, I think.
2 tits in a trance. That's fantastic. I was going to say I'd try and bring it back, but I'm not sure I'd create the right impression if I just started telling people they were like tits in a trance. So 4 floors, and so that was like your sort of. Well, God, it must be amazing, sort of living near a place like that.
Yeah, it was amazing. I mean, if I heard something odd on the radio, I remember hearing "Tell It Like It Is" by Aaron Neville, and then just being able to go into Beano's, and I had a copy because I just had pretty much everything.
Yeah.
So that was obviously most people couldn't do that. It was an amazing shop, and also it had. It's the only shop I've ever been in that had singles, chart singles in a section of their own, like A to Z, and so anything that had been in the chart, and it had the chart position on a sticker. So
they stocked new records as well.
Oh no! Sorry, for old stuff.
Oh, okay.
But I mean, it's because obviously there was journalists bringing stuff in. They'd have new things within a week or two of them coming out. I remember getting the first Specials album in there on Chrysalis, weirdly, like a Dutch pressing of it.
Right, I guess, because
the week that came out.
Yeah.
So they must have, I don't know where they were getting their stock from, but they did used to get pretty much new stuff as well.
How old would you have been at this point?
I was, 1979, I'd have been, 15, 14.
You know that thing that you get when you're like that age or even younger, and you go to record shops that are mostly frequented by older people. Do you ever get? Sometimes you get good attention, don't you? Sometimes someone says, "Oh, what you do? What someone of your age do?" Or like, "Oh, I didn't expect you'd heard of it." Did you ever get any of that kind of nice attention?
No. It was always quite moody.
Really?
Yeah, no, it's one of those things that like going there for like decades. Eventually, obviously, people are nice to you when you spend money. I mean, most record shops were like this. I think it's changed a bit now because having gone through that sort of trough where so many were closing, I think it's quite rare to go into a record shop now where people are moody. There's one in Accrington if anybody wants to relive the experience. But
what happened?
He's just quite moody, the bloke in there. I can't remember what it's called, but he'll look everything up on. This is quite clever. You ask if he's got something. He goes and looks it up on Discogs. Says, "I can get it to you for this amount," and just like looks on Discogs and ups the amount. But for unsuspecting people who've never heard of Discogs, which isn't very many people.
No, I don't think there's too much mileage in that.
No, I think it's running out of steam. That he actually said, "Have you heard of Discogs?" I was like, "Yes," and then he stopped doing that.
It's like Haggle Records that used to be on Essex Road, where like if you tried to haggle, then he'd get really cross. He's like, I think there's an aspect of this that you haven't thought through properly. Yeah, I actually did get that. So I remember when there was growing up in Birmingham, there was a shop in Solihull called Discovery, And when I was 14, I went in and bought a Doors album, which there was the first sort of like Doors album to be released sort of outside, be after Jim Morrison had died. It was called Alive She Cried, and I sort of went in there, and the bloke who worked there sort of said, "Oh, are you buying this for someone?" I said, "I'm buying it for myself," which I sort of was, and he said, "Oh, that's really cool. Oh God, that's impressive." And obviously, of course, now it seems preposterous that anyone would think me cool for buying a Doors record, because time has moved on somewhat. But the Doors still weren't quite so well known in the late 1990s. The really good thing was, about 6 hours later, I came in to get something else, and the bloke said to another guy working at the shop, he said, "There's that kid I was telling you about that bought that Doors record." And then I just kind of like levitated out of the shop. So
no, I can't really remember. I mean, in Beano's, some people were more polite than others. There was a guy called Ray who looked like Cat Weasel, and he worked on the singles floor, and he was just quite rude to everybody. Until after been going there for God knows how long, 20 odd years, we got into a couple of conversations. One about Society's Child by Janice Ian, which is a terrific record. And he said, "Oh no, I remember finding a copy of that when I was on my way to a funeral once. It was like a junk shop, so I thought I'd pop in, and I found it, and I thought, well, I can't carry this to the funeral. I can't just carry a record with me." So he had to put it back. That was his story about Society's Child. It's quite poignant. It seemed very sort of in keeping with Ray's demeanour as well. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. Oh, let's talk about before. There's a tin sitting between us, which is formerly used to have tea leaves in it, and now it's got a bunch of questions I put in, most of which have been stolen from old issues of Smash Hits, but not exclusively. I think we might go back and talk about some other records you've put together for Ace, but I'm going to park that for a bit. I want to see what happens when you open the tin, Bob.
Okay, I'm going to open the tin now.
You'll hear the tin being opened. And like I said, they're not all from Smash Hits in the mid '80s, but just have a bit little rootle around there. You know, a couple were written by me, but
okay. Have you got one of those flush things that you hang down inside the loo?
Oh yeah, that was from Smash Hits 1987. I think that was from an Angry Anderson interview.
No, I haven't, but I do still use. I can't think what they're called. Blue, BLOO.
Oh yeah, or Brobat Blue.
Brobat Blue, that's the one. Yeah.
No.
I was thinking Robat, but I thought I sounded wrong.
Yeah, what?
Brobat Blue. Yeah, so I do still use those, and my mother-in-law said, "Oh, that's funny. You still use those to use." I felt really.
What? Because your mother-in-law's kind of become more up to date than you have.
I suppose so, yeah. When I think about it, I don't normally go around people's houses and toilet flushes blue when they flush it.
That's those discs though. The little kind of
useful.
That's one of the greatest smells of all time, I think.
Yeah, it's a good smell. Yeah.
When I was little, I used to sometimes carry it around the house just so I could idly sniff on it. I mean, I don't know what chemicals they've even got in them, but
even just picking one up with my hand with paper on it, I feel quite uncomfortable. So
okay, I can't remember what Angry Anderson said in response to that question. Do you want to pick out another one?
Okay.
And then I'm going to ask you something serious again. Well, slightly serious, maybe.
Oh, it's a really long one. I need to put my glasses on.
Why don't you pick another? Don't worry, pick another one.
No, I'll do this one. I'll just put my glasses on first.
Okay.
Yeah. If you had to do one of the following, which would it be? A, run a butcher's shop with Samantha Fox. B, go abseiling with Giles Brandreth. C, go and see Torval and Dean with Mick Talbot. Or D, be Harvey Smith's horse in the Horse of the Year show. Well, I think it would have to be A, really, wouldn't it? I mean, Samantha Fox, I suppose, if that's like a question from the 80s, is...
Yeah, I think that was for Nick Kamen.
That was... Which one did he pick, do you know?
I can't remember, but I would. Why wouldn't you pick a running a butcher's shop with Samantha Fox?
That sounds like it'd probably be
It also sounds like
retirement plan.
a very plausible thing. Sounds like a very plausible thing to imagine. I'm
I'm not going to think about it too much, but I can quite easily imagine it. Yeah.
I can imagine I can imagine her sort of kind of coming in from the warehouse with like half a cow's carcass, kind of hanging off her back, and then slamming it quite aggressively on the big wooden block, and then just kind of dividing it into various things. Whilst you I can see you as being a more front of house kind of.
More front of house than Samantha Fox. That's where the business plan falls apart.
Well, do you really want to be carrying that carcass from the back?
No, not really. I was imagining myself with a sort of sealing machine, sort of putting slices of bacon in, which I used to do. So, I've got
really? Okay.
Expert knowledge of how to do.
I think we need a third person in this shop. I think we need to call up Sunita and see what she's doing. Okay, let's go. Let's go back briefly and talk about some of the other sort of stuff you've put together for Ace Records. I'm fascinated by this idea of compilations because I feel that without the compilation, my life would be appreciably worse. My situation would be appreciably worse than it currently is, and I'll sort of tell you why. Because when I started seeing, I use the word in inverted commas, seeing Caitlin, who I'm married to and have been for longer than I care to remember, about 25 years. No, anyways, many years. Anyway, we when we started going out with each other, we were sort of friends. And we decided we went on a driving holiday together as friends, and it was in February, and we just went drive. I had this kind of idea. I was owed some time off by the magazine that I worked for, and I had this idea that it'd be good to just like get in a car and just go anywhere because it was February, so you'd always be able to find somewhere to stay. And when I told her about it, she said, "That's a good idea. Can I come as well?" I said, "Yeah, of course, And anyway, I sort of so in the sort of 1 day period leading up to our leaving to go on this holiday, I decided the only way this could really work would be if I tried to impress her by doing as many compilation tapes as possible, and I thought if I just furnished her with a soundtrack of music that was just so sensational, but constantly, then she would confuse the music with the person that had compiled it, and just sort of want to go out with me. And it was a bit like, now I look back on it, it's a bit like kidnapping someone because she was obviously locked in a moving car with me, and she didn't bring any tapes, so it was like, so I sort of think that, well, by the end of the holiday we were a couple, and I think some kind of Stockholm syndrome sort of happened in that time, whereby we went through a kind of whole process, and by the end of it, it was like she sort of fell in love with her captor, and and so compilation. So obviously, I'm a big fan of compilation tapes.
That's quite unnerving.
Yeah,
that story.
So have you ever But a lot of people start doing compilation tapes often in their late teens, possibly to like impress someone that they maybe want to, not necessarily romantically, but in all sorts of ways. Was that a sort of factor for you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I still make compilations for friends now, except the CD ones, which is still an old-fashioned format now. But I wouldn't make cassettes, so it would be a bit intentionally arcane.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. For girls who I did want to go out with or didn't, and anyone really, I used to love making. I've always loved making compilations. I think something we both have in common, which I think most people who are professional music writers don't, is that we both loved K-Tel albums and what were basically like thrown together cheapo compilations.
Yeah.
We grew up with them, and I think that probably kind of informed my understanding of compilations early on, and then things that Libertine United Artists did in the 70s, in the early to mid 70s. I think it's Andrew Lauder was probably behind them, and he's someone I must talk to about this. Things like the Beat Merchants, Hard Up Heroes, that was on Decca, wasn't it? There's a bunch of compilations of things that weren't hits, and when I was a kid I couldn't understand why they existed, because there was nothing you'd heard of on them.
Hard Up Heroes is the one that's like famous pop stars recordings by them before they were famous. Is
That's
that right?
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah, so it's got like Bowie on it. David
Rod
Essex
Stewart
on it.
is on there. Yeah, that's a good one.
It's a really good one. Yeah, and they're kind of like the first British compilations, and then a lot of rockabilly ones in the mid 70s as well, which Ace started doing.
Yeah.
They were the first compilations I was aware of that weren't just hit compilations or greatest hits.
And did you sort of the KTL ones and the Ronco ones? They're sort of. I almost feel like maybe someone should kind of put together a sort of exhibition of the artwork on those records, because they sort of sit apart really from any other sort of graphic art, because they had to be quite literal representations of the titles a lot of the time. So with Chart Blasters 81, you had a kind of fist kind of punching through a wall and band names kind of scattered around.
There was a lot of explosions, 20 explosive hits, 20 power hits.
Yeah. Chart encounters of the hit kind.
Oh yeah, there's a lot of space ones around the late 70s, early 80s.
Yeah. And
Raiders of the Pop Charts.
Raiders of the Pop Charts.
The last big one before Now came in and
that's
shut them all
right.
down, really.
Yeah, I think Roman Holiday were on that one. And you also had what was it? Space Invasion, which was, so I quite like the ones where they kind of, because they weren't all sort of, like you said, they weren't all sort of things that were in the chart at that time. Sometimes you get these thematic ones. So Space Invasion was kind of like a bunch of songs that all had a kind of, but they weren't all kind of futuristic sounding songs. So you'd have like the Yellow Magic Orchestra, but you'd also have Fireball by Deep Purple. And
oh really? Wow.
Yeah,
I never had that one. I remember it. I can remember the sleeve being like sort of like mock-up of Space Invaders, I think, wasn't it?
That's right. Yeah.
And there was Street Level. I remember was like a kind of punk and new wave one. That was quite good. Ronco did.
That was a really good. That was quite thorough. You know, that was if you wanted to get into the whole new wave sort of phenomenon very quickly. That was. It's a bit similarly with the new romantic one,
the Modern Dance.
Yes.
Yeah, that was a really good one.
Yeah, I mean that
would kind of work now as like a compilation of entry levels of new romantic futurist stuff.
Yeah, it really would. That's fantastic. And so there's a couple of the other compilations that you've put together for Ace that I also wanted to talk about. I mean, English Weather is, you know, came out to a fantastic reception, and I think again it's this sort of thing that's kind of interesting to me, of almost sort of retrospectively giving a name to, if not a genre, then a sort of a phenomenon, a musical phenomenon that happened, and that's kind of a case in point, isn't it, in a way?
Yeah, I mean it's not meant as a genre name, but it's basically a collection of things that are sort of post psychedelic and pre-progressive rock. How Britain might have felt on the first day of the 70s, I think was the idea.
Was that the brief you kind of set yourself almost?
Yeah. It was. Well, I say this in the sleeve notes, but it just came about. I was in a shop in Newcastle. I was doing some work in Sunderland a couple of years ago, and I just popped into this shop, and it was absolutely torrential, like really torrential rain out. And I was meant to be doing some stuff in Newcastle, but I just ended up staying in the shop for about 3 hours. And when I went in there, they were playing this album, which at first I couldn't work out if it was a new band trying to sound like something from the early 70s or an actual band, because it was slightly amateurish. And it's by a Sheffield group called Shape of the Rain, which is a great name for a group. And they played that, and then they were playing other stuff which all sounded in a similar vein. It turned out they had like one bloke's record collection from the early 70s, and he had a lot of like rare things like Spring, T2, and the bloke said, what were you looking for? I said, well, this sounds pretty good. Have you got more things like this? And he showed me this huge collection. And so, ended up spending the whole afternoon listening to these things. And I thought, well, these all fit together really nicely. And that was where it was just, that's where it came from, really, just that day. And there was obviously quite a few things in that vein I already knew that I wanted to include, like Refugees by Van de Graaff Generator I've always loved. It's kind of like early progressive rock before it becomes like a hardened sound that you expect, like a little organ solo or anything like that.
Yeah, and there's also enough kind of, it also, when there's enough pop inside it and enough melody to sort of, there's a kind of economy about it that maybe isn't so much in.
No, absolutely. And I think it's one of those things where, because I love British psychedelia, and I know people who like prog, and have always said, well, I don't know why you don't like prog. It's a logical extension of British psychedelia.
Yeah.
And it was not knowing these bits in the middle, which are kind of what English weather is, that meant I couldn't make the join from one to the other. But I mean, pretty much all those bands like Yes, Genesis, Camel, Caravan, all their first albums are really melodic and, like you said, quite economical. There's no sort of 15-minute instrumentals or anything. And that's kind of the point at which the two genres joined together, and that's what the compilation was about.
It's a decade that sort of starts. I mean, the 70s and the 80s, I think, were sort of quite singular in a way, in as much as it feels like both those decades started on time. The 60s ended, and looking at the music press at the time and the music that was happening, it felt like they really did end on December the 31st, 1969. And everyone woke up the following day and feeling a little bit embarrassed about how naive they were in the 60s, and, that suddenly it was raining and everyone had to go to work.
Yeah,
that's kind of how it seems, isn't it?
Yeah, that's definitely how it seems to me. I don't really remember. I remember things that happened in the 60s, but I wasn't aware of it being the 60s. But the early 70s, I can remember really clearly, and just sort of seeing hippies on Box Hill and bikers on Box Hill, and just hearing things, album tracks that Annie Nightingale might have been playing on the radio when we were driving to my grandparents or whatever, which are very. Which English weather kind of like I was again trying to sort of get that feeling by putting a bunch of songs together, but it always felt like, to me, like even with glam and things, that people were making the most of the situation, and people really wanted it to still be the 60s.
I feel like glam, in a way, you know way more about this than I do, and so do correct me if I'm wrong, but it feels like glam in a way is kind of rock and roll trying to get it back in through the back door, because it kind of, a lot of it feels like a sort of version of rock and roll music rather than pop music, and also, a lot of the people that were involved with glam were sort of ex-rock and rollers who were just kind of having one last roll. Even the ones that didn't have hits, like Marty Wilde, sort of attempted to sort of reinvent himself, didn't he?
There's loads of Marty Wilde glam singles under various different names.
Yeah.
And he was writing songs for his son Ricky Wilde, who made some great singles as well.
Yeah.
Again, it's somebody I really want to interview and talk to about it. So Marty Wilde really threw himself quite wholeheartedly into glam, and I think he did like a couple of singles as Marty Wilde, but then he was Zappo, and he was oh god, what are they called, Ruby somebody in the Dreamboats, which is just him, but it's like, like pretending he's a girl singer.
He sounds like he was like more than maybe
Ruby
anyone
Pearl
else.
On the Dreamboats. So.
He sounds like he was having a bit of a laugh.
Oh yeah,
the whole time. Do you know what I mean? He sort of sounds like there's no real great attempt to not sound like he's someone just sort of throw just for a bit of fun, throwing stuff against the wall and seeing what happens.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he's probably doing that with. Him and Ricky were both writing for Kim Wilde, weren't they? Like a few years after that. And it's, I think it's much the same approach, really.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, I was writing something about Cambodia recently, and Cambodia is an interesting Kim Wilde song because I think it was her third or fourth single, and the first two singles were very much in a sort of new wave kind of mode, and then they obviously, and in that short period of time, you know, all these kind of new romantics and futurists sort of were in the charts, and they had to think quickly, and Cambodia is this kind of wonderful glacial sort of minor key. It's got very sort of Presades Europe, like a lot of things like Voyage Voyage.
Yeah, it really does sound like Voyage Voyage. No, it's a terrific record. I don't know what the story is behind that. Oh, and also the story in the song is kind of an unfinished. There's no real point to it. I don't think it's literally about someone who flies over Cambodia during the war and never comes back. I think that's it. Yeah. There's no kind of there's a backstory, but there's no real conclusion to it, which makes it even more mysterious. And it's a really good
she saw. I think the general gist of the story is he saw something. He saw something in the war.
That's it.
She kind of lost him. You know, he even if
what it is.
Yeah, she sort of. He was lost to whatever terrible things that he'd seen. I think is the sort of gist of it. Okay, I think. Do you want to have another look in the tin and see what's
It's sidetracked by Kim Wilde.
There's no such thing as being sidetracked by Kim Wilde. It's just.
You could run a flower shop with Kim Wilde. That'd be a good job.
Oh, because she's into horticulture, isn't she?
Yeah.
That would be great, wouldn't it?
Okay, here we go. If you could bring back one packaging design that's no longer in use, what would it be? Ooh.
That's going to be a tough one for you, I think.
Yeah. Blimey. Packaging design. I mean, I really like the Sainsbury's own brand cornflakes packets.
Right.
I think are really, really beautiful.
Yeah.
Which we used on a fan club CD once. I think Johnny Trunk used as the cover of his
book,
Sainsbury's book. Yeah. It's incredibly simple. They had their own in-house design team, Sainsbury's, which is incredible.
And they even keep a little kind of museum, don't they? That's not open to the public. I think that's kind of.
You can make an appointment to go and see it. It's not as complete as you think it might be. It's I think a lot of things they never thought to keep one of, but. They've got like sort of sketches of whatever. They have processed peas tin.
But it is very big. Yeah, it's the whole. I mean, Johnny's book is just a wonderful. It's a book that you go back to time and time again because it's just that whole aesthetic is spread across. But is the cornflakes one the one with the kind of pagan sun on it?
No, they did do that. That was later, I think. It was. It's just white with orange discs.
Okay.
Representing, like, you know, a whole series of them representing cornflakes. But yeah, the sort of just design around that time, I think, is pretty incredible. There was a company called Design Research Unit who did all the British Rail stuff, and Watney's. There was an exhibition we went to their designs. I just love the way that period looks and the simplicity and use of typeface. It's
Design Research Unit.
Yeah.
Oh, I thought they were signed to Ghostbox.
It's all very Ghostbox.
It is very Ghostbox, isn't it? While you put your hand back in the tin, I'll just sort of, tell you that if I had to choose one, it would probably be Vosine shampoo, the kind of teardrop-shaped bottle from the late 70s, which was a kind of brown, a bit like the colour of brown Pyrex. And
I remember it.
Yeah,
it was really nice.
But if you buy Vosine shampoo, I'm not sure how interesting people find it, but I'm going to tell you anyway. It's the same smell, so obviously Proustian rush every time I wash my hair, but there's no Vosine conditioner on sale in the shops, so you have to use another conditioner which gets rid of the smell of the Vosine, which is a great disappointing state of affairs to me because I want to be able to smell the comforting Proustian rush smell of Vosine as I walk around going about my daily business, and the lack of conditioner denies me of this pleasure.
That's a shame. I don't use conditioner myself, so.
Well, maybe that's the way to go. Okay.
Yeah.
Have I just been wasting my money on conditioner?
I don't know. I think my hair probably looks like straw. I don't know. You can tell me.
I think mine looks more like straw than
yours. Don't use conditioner.
Okay.
Fosing, I didn't know they still made it, but that really is. We're sounding a bit self-parody-ish here. I think there was a conversation about the smell of Fosing.
People knew what they were getting into when they pressed play. Okay.
Should I read out the next question? What's the most horrible thing you've found in something you've eaten? I put some Weetabix in a bowl once, and there was a maggot sitting on one of the Weetabixes. That wasn't great. Just before I put the milk on, I was really relieved too.
Was this
still alive? Was
this a long time ago?
In the 90s. I don't know how it got in there.
You wouldn't really think there'd be much for maggots in Weetabix.
No, I don't know how it got in there. I don't know what kind of maggot it was.
Maybe it survived from one of the eggs from the egg store, and it was just
maggot talk here.
Sorry?
A lot of maggot talk in this conversation.
Maybe it kind of moved into one of your shoes when you moved house, and it procreated, and it was like an ancestor of the egg maggots from previously. Anyway,
that's probably the most horrible thing I've ever found.
Okay, so moving swiftly on, have you got various sort of compilations in varying stages of completion, and then when they kind of hit, a bit like those sort of thermometer things that they have on telethons, when they hit a certain level, then it's time. Then it's time to kind of get going. Is it? Is that the situation? Have you got some kind of spreadsheet with various the progress of various compilations?
Not really. I mean, I do make my own ones just to listen to at home on mini discs. I'm the last person in the world who still uses mini disc. So I've got plenty that are just my own ones, which I might try and convince people to do.
Yeah. Or
try and convince Ace to do as actual commercially available compilations. But I mean, some of these were State of the Union was, and I'm working on a 3-day week one at the moment, which hopefully is going to be out next spring.
So, to talk us through the kind of thematic sort of genesis of that?
Well, the genesis of it, I suppose, is just I've collected glam records for a long time, and there are quite a lot of records that kind of fit in that. Don't quite fit in that box, but they'll just sound very British and early 70s, which that's basically what glam is to me. So yeah, I'm trying to think what the ingredients would be, like a pub piano.
Yeah,
it'll sound a bit like somebody in the studio's on strike. Instruments have been rationed. There was a power cut, so they had to finish after an hour and a half. So it's kind of like almost got this kind of wartime feel to it, because productions have been so full before and were so full not long afterwards. You think of something like Bohemian Rhapsody or I'm Not in Love. It's just this sort of like 73, 74 period where things just sounded muddy and maybe sounded a bit nationalised as well.
Yeah,
it's quite hard to. It's something that when you hear it, you know what it is. It's
absolutely.
Normally got a bit of fuzz guitar.
Brilliant. It sounds wonderful.
So that's what I'm working on at the moment. Hopefully we'll get that out in time for Brexit.
That would be nice. Well, that's it, the interesting thing, isn't it? But it's and I was thinking about that with State of the Union, because obviously it's there's a sort of weird sort of symmetry of putting out an album which is a compilation which sort of marks a time of soul searching and sort of self-reflection in American history, and obviously it's coming out in a sort of comparable another time of self-reflection in the time.
That's. I mean, I think that's one of the reasons, hopefully, that it kind of makes sense to do it now. So this will be out around the time of the midterms.
Right.
So
Okay.
I'd be interested if it gets any attention in America. And the 3-day week compilation will come out probably next April.
Right.
And again, it's I think that period was, that's not part of the Union by the straw, because I think it was a lot of records that seem really insular and cut off from. It's Britain really looking quite inward, and in straitened times, which obviously will be it's quite very similar to now. I think, even though the music that's coming out now doesn't really sound like that.
No, but it is. I guess I wonder sort of what. I guess all popular music, all kind of popular music, is emblematic of its time. But I guess it's too soon to know right now in what ways the music of now will be seen as being emblematic of what's kind of happening. In the wider world. Yeah,
that's true. You do need a bit of distance. I think again, and then there's another thing that's nice about doing compilations of things from the past is you can just get a lot more perspective on it, and things that will fit together that maybe you'd never have thought would fit together at the time.
Which of the compilations you made are you sort of most pleased with? That you?
I think English Weather, because it was the first one I did for Ace, and it was something that made sense in my head, but I had absolutely no idea if it would make sense to anybody else.
Yeah,
and it seemed quite a hard thing to sell, but because people liked it so much, that was really exciting.
Yeah, so you proceed in a more confident manner.
Yeah, exactly. So Paris in the Spring, I think, again, was something I'd had in my head for a while, because French pop just really, before I knew that much about it, and before the internet, I was buying a lot of sort of yay stuff and France Gall and Françoise Hardy, and everything seemed to stop in 1968. After that, those people were either making records that sounded nothing like what they did before, or they were making pretty terrible bubblegum records like France Gall did, and obviously you had bands making albums all of a sudden. It just changed almost overnight. Kind of what I wanted to get across in that compilation was music from the summer of 1968 onwards for the next few years, and it bore almost no resemblance to what came before, but had a definite feel of its own. It's
incredible, and sort of this and again the sound of French music sort of changed very radically from being sort of very kind of pop centered, and then suddenly you have these so many French artists started to use the studio in such a sophisticated and brilliant way, didn't they? And that really kind of comes through on a lot of the songs on the Paris in the Spring compilation.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I hadn't thought of that, because you listen to the early Françoise Hardy records. I know she hates them, but they do sound incredibly threadbare. It's like they sound like someone trying to sound like Cliff Richard and the Shadows, basically, with a girl singer. But it's so DIY sounding.
They came here, some of them, didn't they? Because I know Françoise Hardy came over here to make an album. Went to was it Sound Techniques? I think she might have made one in Sound Techniques. I think and then Melody Nelson was made in which were the studios in Marble Arch?
The Pie.
Was it the Pie? I think it was made at the ones that became Solid Bond, I think, later on. I think so. I could get someone correct me, but again, recorded in London.
Yeah. I'm not sure where, to be honest. I know. Yeah, the Françoise Hardy one, I think Ace put out.
Right.
Was recorded at Sound Techniques.
Right. Okay.
The English language one, is that the one you mean?
It's 1972. Was that 1972?
Yeah, I think so.
We can check later.
But yeah, I mean, that was something we did. St Etienne did an album with David Whittaker, the arranger who worked with Serge Gainsbourg, and I asked him which studio, how they decided which studio they were going to record in. He said, well, it just depended whether me or Serge wanted to buy some new clothes, really.
Which is the right answer.
Yeah, I think so. It's like the colour of the guitar is much more important than the manufacturer. No, not really.
Just a quick word about, we kind of talked about Sound Techniques. That almost brings us quite nicely onto When the Day Is Done, the Robert Kirby compilation. Was that presumably, and again, and I guess you initiate all your ideas, but like, how did what sort of itch were you looking to scratch, as it were, with that one?
Well, I think because I met Robert Kirby not long before he died. He was a really lovely bloke, and we were hoping to get him to do some St Etienne stuff, but he was actually so busy at that point that he didn't have time. We're hoping to get him to do. We were doing a live performance at a festival hall. That's what it was, like a film. So we wanted him to score and conduct the soundtrack, and he was just too busy. But he was somebody who I knew his name from the Nick Drake records, and I'd always thought his arrangements were really my favourite thing about them. And so I always looked out for his name on odd things, and he would turn up on whatever Spyro Gyra and lots of British folk rock things. But if I saw anything with his name on the credit and it wasn't crazily expensive, I'd buy it. So I'd sort of kind of amassed this collection of Robert Kirby arrangements anyway. And when he died, I assumed that Universal, who'd done a pretty good job of Sandy Denny's archive and Nick Drake's, would just instantly put this compilation together. Yeah, it just seemed so obvious. And then years went by and nobody'd done it, so I pitched it, and I found more things since as well. I mean, it's,
like what?
Oh God, I'm trying to think of his name now. That's annoying. I can't think of it. So it's not much of an anecdote. But I think what he was really good at was taking fairly mediocre singer-songwriter material, writing this beautiful arrangement, and so it ends up being something completely different. I think Forest in the Shore by Keith Christmas is probably the best example of that. The song on its own barely exists, but
you're right, actually. So I mean, I bought that Keith Christmas album on the basis of hearing it on your compilation, and but he was very good like that, Robert Kirby, at sort of hanging back when the song didn't really require too much from him, and then just kind of politely just sort of, really bringing something extraordinary when, it's funny you should say, but he's your favourite thing about those Nick Drake records, because I love Nick Drake, and I've probably written more about Nick Drake, I think, than any other artist, but there seems to be this slight stigma about saying that Brighter Later is your favourite. Like, you have to, like, Pink Moon's supposed to, you're supposed to say it's Pink Moon because it's dark and it's like the last album he made before he died, and Robert Kirby's arrangements on there. You're almost expected to say that there's a kind of like unspoken party line that Robert Kirby's arrangements turn those songs into something more approaching pop songs. And fine, they're incredible. Those arrangements are just so much part of what makes those songs what they are. And I don't imagine Nick Drake would have had a problem with someone. Of course, that's why he brought him with him on his journey from university.
Absolutely. It's quite the opposite. He insisted on him being involved, didn't he?
But Hazy Jane too.
Yeah.
Christ,
that's incredible. And the first two albums are the ones I definitely play or have played more than Pink Moon.
You can sort of use them in your life more, can't you? Which, and I don't think that's to be sniffed at, by that criterion of.
That's good criterion.
I think we're kind of close to having to sort of wrap up, but I think do you want to just stick your hand in the tin a couple more times and
okay.
Because apart from anything else, I can't remember what I wrote on those cards because I wrote them about 6 a.m.
Let's put my glasses on. Oh, hang on. No, I can read it. It says, "What's your favourite Smiths song?"
Do you know, right, I wrote that one. Oh, no, actually, no, I didn't. That was into actually. I thought, hang on, I've never, all these years I've known you, I don't think I've ever had a conversation with you about the Smiths.
Well,
I've got no idea really what you think about them, if you listen to you still do?
I don't, but I mean, I don't listen to, I can't think last time I put a Nick Drake record on either, or there's a lot of things that I've listened to a lot in my life, I suppose, if you just move into other things, and it's not that you don't like those records anymore, you just don't really think to put them on. No, I loved the Smiths at the time.
I don't think I could even guess what your favourite Smiths song is, and that surprised me, because I felt like I ought to be able to guess.
Absolute favourite Smiths song. Good grief, that's pretty hard. I mean, I'd say my favourite Smiths record was the Boy with a Thorn in Your Side with Asleep and Rubber Ring on the B-side, which is like one of the most incredible 3 tracks. And also there's William It Was Really Nothing, please, let me get what I want. And How Soon Is Now was 3 tracks on one single.
Yeah.
So that, I mean, they were just certainly an amazing singles group. I think The Queen Is Dead is probably the only really solid album. The first two are pretty hard going, but no, I loved them at the time. I thought Morrissey was an amazing lyricist, and they were great. I mean, I think I always found the rhythm section a bit clunky, which again is like a lot of people say, 4 musicians in perfect harmony. It's like, no, clearly two of them are really sort of the main two Smiths, and all the court cases and everything. I think that's kind of fair enough. It could have been any bassist and drummer. And
what did he call it? What did he call them? Morrissey, disparagingly called them Bruce and Rick, didn't he? When he was talking about
that's
But I remember the footage of them doing Barbarism Begins at Home on the tube for the first time, and there's this look on. I mean, I shouldn't really hold it. It seems a bit unfair, but there's a look. It must be on YouTube. There's a look on Mike Joyce's face when they do a little extended drum intro to Barbarism Begins at Home, and there's a slightly dopey canine smile on his face, as if to say, "This is really good, isn't it? Look, I've really nailed this one." It's just the smile. It's one thing to do it, but to just smile in that way, it's just. It's like the most deeply unmysterious thing,
You also did that terrible thing of wearing a Smiths t-shirt in photo sessions. It's like, no.
He had a bit of a mullet as well at one point as well. Sorry, I'm
sure he's a lovely player. Sounds quite mean. But no, the Smith. I love the Smiths.
Do you know what was also sorry? Well, we're thinking about it now. Is it quite funny that sort of he answered an advert to join Suede. And I think it said that it influences the Smiths. Well, of course you're influenced by this because you were in them. But so there was so I think for about one rehearsal he was in Suede.
Really?
Yeah, before they were they met him, and then they stayed friends. He kind of gave them advice and stuff. So,
that's really sweet.
It is sweet, but it's kind of like it's sort of it's just kind of surprising, I guess. I don't know what it is.
No, there is a word I can't.
Guileless, maybe.
Guileless,
isn't it? Yeah.
Guileless.
From one last random question, and then I guess we'll have to go and get some lunch or something.
Okay, Ray-Bans, John Lennon shades, or aviators. There might be one other one in there as well. I can't read.
I know. So the question is, it's a straight choice. So. Ray-Bans, little round John Lennon shades, or aviators?
Ray-Bans.
Still.
Yeah. Well, I've also gone back to them. I bought some Ray-Ban sunglasses this summer.
Yeah.
For the first time in a long time.
There's never a bad time to wear Ray-Bans.
No, I think they've always looked good, really. There was a point where it made you look like you were trying to be in the Jeeves and Mary chain, but now it doesn't really anymore.
No,
it's 30 odd years ago.
Yeah. I've gone back to the black 501s. It's kind of, at my time of life, it's comfortable.
Corduroy. I'm very never wear denim.
No, I don't think. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, I've never seen you. Although, Matt, I think maybe now that I think when you're promoting the State of the Union, I think you should allow yourself denim should be your promotional kind of outfit for that whole period.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure. I was thinking more sort of Frank Sinatra Watertown look might be more appropriate.
You're right, I guess. Right, well, Bob, thank you very much. It's been lovely.
Yeah, that's fun.
We must do it again sometime soon.
That'd
I think.
Be good. Yeah.
You have been listening to the ACE podcast. I'm Pete Paphides, and I hope you can join me next time. Bye-bye. For more excellent music, you can scoot over to the Ace Records website, www.acerecords.co.uk, for all the wonderful music you could possibly need.